Imagine, if you will, a high-stakes game of economic chess, set in the very near future. The players? The United States and India. Today, we're going to unpack a fascinating analysis of how what started as a massive trade challenge was turned into a strategic masterstroke. Let's dive right in.
This single line from our source material really sets the tone, doesn't it? It tells us right away this isn't just about spreadsheets and economic policy. Nope, this is about a full-blown clash of strategies and worldviews, all playing out on the global stage.
All right, so how did this whole battle even start? Well, the analysis takes us back to late 2025. This is when the United States made a really dramatic opening move that sent some serious shockwaves through the Indian economy.
And this number, this is what started it all. 50%. Just let that sink in. A staggering 50% tariff slapped on all goods coming from India into the US. I mean, wow. The analysis makes it clear this was a massive power play, designed to put one of the world's fastest-growing economies in a very tight corner. And this slide, it just frames the conflict perfectly. The source argues that this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill tariff dispute. It was a total clash of philosophies. On one side, you have what's described as an ego-driven power play. And on the other, a meticulous, carefully planned, long-term strategy for global economic dominance. It's like two grandmasters playing on the same board, but with completely different rulebooks.
So, faced with this economic earthquake, what did India do? Well, its response wasn't to play defense. Not at all. Instead, they hit the accelerator on a national strategy that had actually been in the works for years, Atmanirbhar Bharat, which basically translates to Self-Reliant India. This was them pivoting from defense straight into offense.
And the objective here, talk about ambitious. The goal wasn't just to weather the storm of these tariffs. The real plan was to fundamentally change India's entire role in the global economy, to go from a nation that mostly buys stuff from the world to a nation that supplies the world.
So, the big question is, how did they plan to pull it off? The source material breaks down India's counterattack into 4 clear pillars. Think of these as the specific tactical moves they used to neutralize the tariffs and totally flip the script. And here they are, the 4 pillars of their strategy. Tweaking their currency to be more competitive, sparking a revolution in their own defense industry, making a huge push into the supercritical semiconductor market, and playing the long game to move away from the US dollar. This wasn't just a list of ideas, it was a coordinated economic counteroffensive. Let's see how each piece of the puzzle worked.
Okay, so the first pillar was a really brilliant financial move. The Reserve Bank of India used a strategy called managed depreciation. Now, what that means, in simple terms, is that instead of trying to keep their currency, the rupee, super strong, they strategically and carefully let it get a little weaker. Why? To make everything India sells to the world that much cheaper to buy.
And this chart right here shows you exactly how it worked. The source points out that the rupee slowly drifted from about 83 to $1 to a new normal, somewhere around 90 to 92. This slow, crawl-like depreciation, as they call it, was a game changer. It effectively canceled out a huge chunk of that 50% tariff, keeping Indian products in the game.
Now, while that currency move helped soften the blow, the second pillar was all about building some serious offensive economic muscle. We're talking about a defense revolution. And just look at this number. That's the record value of India's defense exports in fiscal year 2025. You got to remember, for decades, India was one of the world's top buyers of weapons. This signals a complete 180.
The analysis says India started actively selling advanced hardware, like their BrahMos missiles and Tejas jets, to other developing countries, what's often called the Global South. And a huge selling point was this. These deals came with no political strings attached, which is often not the case with US hardware. They were basically filling a vacuum left by frozen American defense contracts.
The third pillar tackles what is maybe the most critical piece of the entire modern economy: computer chips. As the quote says, semiconductors are the new oil. If you control the supply of chips, you basically control the future of all technology.
And this is huge. By January 2026, India had 4 major semiconductor plants up and running. But they weren't just making chips. They were designing and exporting their own high-end, defense-grade versions. The goal was crystal clear: break the US-China duopoly on chips and reduce Washington's leverage over the global tech supply chain.
And finally, we get to the fourth pillar, de-dollarization. Now, this is the long game. The source argues that the US tariffs just pushed India to speed up its plans to do international business using its own currency. With its own defense and tech exports booming, India now had valuable goods to trade, making deals like Rupee for oil with Russia and the UAE possible. This was the beginning of a slow but steady erosion of the dollar's total dominance.
So, we've got these 4 interconnected strategies. But what was the result? Did it all work? Well, the analysis presents a really stark contrast when you look at the economic scorecards for both the US and India by the end of 2026. And this table from the source material, it pretty much tells the whole story. On the US side, it points to job losses, stubborn high inflation thanks to the tariff tax, and a loss of strategic influence in Asia. But then you look at the India column, growth in manufacturing, stable inflation, and a whole network of new global partnerships. In short, the tables were completely turned.
So what does all this mean for the big picture? What's the takeaway? Well, according to this analysis, the result of this trade war marks a really significant shift, announcing India's arrival as a new and very formidable player on the global stage.
This quote from the source it perfectly captures the central argument. The idea that the very policy designed to protect American interests might have, ironically, created the perfect storm for a competitor to rise and put its own interests first.
And that leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. According to the scenario laid out in our source material, a policy of economic protectionism didn't actually lead to American dominance. Instead, it seems to have sparked the rise of a new, self-reliant global power, a fascinating outcome to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.